So we are now going to spend half an hour where you are not going to be forced to talk, but we are going to talk. Then we're going to go back to you for a little sense making. Then we're going to go back to a free flow of question and answers. The time is going to fly by. But first, to situate us in this landscape, I'm going to introduce Ken Thompson, who's terrific. That's my introduction. And he's going to give a 3-slide overview of the aligned funders of the Roadmap Project. And do you need the clicker?
I guess I do.
There's a big green button.
Excellent. Big green button. Okay, cool. I'm actually going to start with just, hey, hello everyone. I'm Ken Thompson. I'm a senior program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where I have worked basically forever, and have worked on our collective impact work in Seattle and South King County for the past 6 years or so. Really is the exclusive part of my work as a program officer at the foundation. We're involved in many different kinds of collective impact work in Seattle and across the region. We're mainly going to reflect on our experiences jointly together on the Roadmap Project. It's not the only collective impact work that any of us really are involved and engaged in. But I'm going to give you a quick little grounding in that project just so you get a little overview and just a tiny little bit about various things we've tried about bringing funders together to work alongside community and other partners in this project. So the Roadmap Project, and you will learn a lot, maybe more than you ever wanted to know about the Roadmap Project in other sessions still to come. So I'm going to give you the quick overview. It's a cradle to college and career effort located in Seattle and South King County. Its overall goal is to keep kids on track from birth through some completion of a college or career credential or something that launches them into the next stage of their life. It covers a pretty big area. It's 7 school districts. It's 125,000 K-12 students. So for those of you maybe haven't spent a lot of time in Seattle or the region, it's actually a tremendously diverse area with a lot of families and communities and kids from other parts of the world and around the United States. The overall goal of the Roadmap Project is to double the number of students who complete post-secondary credentials and to completely eliminate the opportunity gaps around income and race in the community. And those are big goals. We're working on those. Started in 2010. We're working towards that goal in 2020. Probably most collective impact projects have some version of the crazy wheel of work groups and covers and governance colors and governance systems and other things. I put this up to show you that, in fact, I think, yes, the light purple wedge on the side is the aligned funders work group. So we've tried something in this effort that I haven't necessarily heard that other collective impact projects have tried, which is that we actually literally tried to form a kind of work group of funders who would come together, much like there's a work group around English language learners, or there's a work group around STEM. There's some other leadership groups. We really made this attempt, took a stab at, not the best metaphor, but kind of seeing what we could do by bringing funders together to try and create a different kind of conversation. We'll talk a little more in depth about various things that worked that didn't work, but we have tried different ways of convening this group. So we started with, for the first year, having the funders themselves convene themselves and meet together and talk, and we felt like that wasn't getting us quite far enough. We needed more help to kind of help us come together and actually do some things. So then we turned to facilitation from Philanthropy Northwest, and actually in the person of Mr. Ted Lord himself, and then another colleague of his at Philanthropy Northwest, who is a kind of someone within the funder space to convene us and get us working more together, and they did a good job of bringing more funders to the table. And we still struggled really to find the way we would work together as funders. We did work on initiating something called a Rapid Resource Fund, a small pooled grants fund for smaller dollar investments. It's then now been going for a couple of years across the roadmap. But most recently, we've actually turned to having the backbone itself convene us as a group of funders. Kind of working on another model where we feel like maybe we can become a little even more closely tied to the project itself by having the backbone be the lead in our work. I will, for the moment, pass on. I will not pass judgment yet on how these things worked out for us, and I think in the course of our conversation, we will discuss some of the things that have worked about our various attempts to bring funders together and align them, and what maybe just didn't work out so well.
Perfect. Thank you. We talked several times before this session about what would be the most fun and interesting thing we could do for you, but also for ourselves. And I think we came up with the new construct of the chewy question. That words again were chewy question. So each of our friends on stage has picked a chewy question they will address for 5 minutes, and then we'll do a little discussion of that chewy question. And Sally Gillis is our first chewy question. She's also going to tell you a little bit about her organization, and she's also going to really speak to the notion of, can funders be an equal partner at a table with community groups, but also with each other, depending on size, as one of the questions was here, and probably in other ways I can't even begin to know. Sally?
Hi, I'm Sally Gillis. I represent Social Venture Partners as the Director of Collective Action. Social Venture Partners is based here in Seattle, although we have 40 affiliates across the world. And it's an opportunity for individual donors to pool their time and talent resources to strengthen nonprofits and to together invest in collaborative solutions. As we've worked to invest in collective action, we have been mixing and balancing power as funders, both from individuals to representing ourselves as an organization at tables with my lovely colleagues here. And so for my meaty question, or chewy question, sorry, how can we balance power? Can we balance power? I want to say aspirationally, yes, but I think we have some work to do to get there. And that work is really acknowledging the power that we have, thinking about how we show up in rooms, how we name challenges and solutions, and to the questions earlier about equity. Are we always only showing up at the tables that we set, or are we showing up at other tables, and are we willing to be silent in those rooms and truly learn? I think a bit about how we can use our power for good, and this is a conversation that SVP has all the time with our individual donors. How can we make long-term investments in organizations, enable those organizations to truly have time and capacity to grow and be adaptive in the changing world that they're operating in? How can we, as funders with some power, encourage risk? How can we, through our grant dollars and through our time, enable that risk and be supportive of that risk? I think of the grant relationships that SVP has that are actually transformative are when we've built enough of a relationship and power with an organization where that organization is able to say, Sally, no, that doesn't make sense. That's not the best use of the next step or the next choice of our work. And I will sit here with my two colleagues and say that we have to acknowledge that all funders aren't equal. Social Venture Partners has the smallest budget up here, and we raise our budget annually, which not everyone does. And and in balancing that, I think there is value of the large funders and there is value of the small funders. Smaller funders have to acknowledge that not all of the heavy lifting can be done by the big foundations, and larger foundations need to make space for smaller foundations to be at the table. We, as folks in this room, also have to make space for newer funders, funders that haven't yet come into their operating position or come into their own wealth if we're talking about an individual. And as we do that, we don't need to make space and just let them fumble on their own. One of the benefits of the aligned funding group that we're up here speaking a bit about is that it is an open information sharing place. So for newer funders, it's a welcoming place to gain information about the work underway within the roadmap, and we structure our time together to do some intentional deep dives into elements in the cradle to career space that can lead to future investment. Because for a newer funder, the idea of collective impact is overwhelming. To a tenured funder, the idea of collective impact can be overwhelming. And so really making space to raise up opportunities for investment, challenges that individuals are facing or foundations are facing, and strategize together is important. We also need to acknowledge that those rooms can't just be funders. And so while this is one piece of the overall pie, or I don't actually know which slide you went with, we need to be intentional about how we link to those other pieces. And in doing so, ensure that we're talking to each other as funding peers.
I thought we'd have a couple minutes where we just kind of talk about this in response. What came up for either of you listening to Sally?
I think it's true. I mean, kind of to the original part of the question about how do we sit at tables that include a lot that's not just about funders, that's about the broad member of lots of different large and small community organizations that are part of collective impact projects. It's been an interesting experience over the past 5 or 6 years because I think funders have both it's been mentioned by some that the presence of funders at some of the tables because some funders who are very deep in a particular area, like early childhood, will also come to the specific early childhood work group. And then there are also a few funders, although less than 10% of the broad governance body is actually funders, that funders have an outside amount of influence in how decisions are made in the project. And clearly there is, obviously, in our work, a power imbalance that you always have to pay attention to. But on the flip side, there's also critique of funders that they're not engaged enough in knowing what's going on, and collective impact projects are, in fact, a great way to understand better the work that is happening on the ground, how and where the community prioritize activities. And so part of the challenging and unresolved to me work of collective impact and funder role is figuring out that right balance. Surely a big part of it is how you show up, whether you have existing trust in the community. But even then, there is suspicion and, to some extent, legitimate worry about outsized influence, I think, regardless of how humbly you work to show up in these environments. So keeping a read on that and knowing what the moment to not appear, which is a hard one to do, really. And the more engaged you are in the project, the harder it is to step out, is something that is as part of the funder skill set, I think.
Nice.
And maybe the other thing I would add, there have been a lot of lessons that we have learned through our work together around the Aligned Funder group, and just thinking about the three of us and how we take the things that we've learned and use in other ways. So in addition to learning more about the Roadmap Project, you're also going to learn more about some other collective impact efforts that are happening in this region. One that we're very deeply involved. Well, maybe I should introduce myself really quickly. Michael Brown with the Seattle Foundation, and our partnership with the community and with King County government called Communities of Opportunity. And we've learned so much from this, the funder power dynamic engagement with community, where we built a collective impact model that flips all of that on its head. And I would say that one of the things that has helped me and my team as we've moved forward with this effort is, we've tended to think as funders that utilizing our power can be a bad thing. Actually, it can be a really good thing when it's amplifying the voice of community. So, we'll talk a little bit more about it, in other sessions, but one of the things that I get to do is play bad guy with my colleagues at the county, keeping them from doing what funders normally do, and that's being top-down directive. We can come in and balance that with, that's not how we're driving this, that's not what we agreed to, and once again, we're leading with what the community thinks is the right approach.
Beautiful. I thought that also began to speak about when not to show up, when to pull out, when to show up and double down. Can you give an example from your organization of how someone has shifted how they show up at a table?
Sure. And I'm just going to ask you back, Ted, are you looking for an individual or an organization?
Either one. I just think it's great to kind of ground this in, what is a changed behavior that a funder, potentially either an individual SVP member or an SVP as an organization, what is one move you've made trying to show up differently?
So one of the things for social venture partners that we've worked a lot on is education and listening. I think for folks like Ken who are able to fully invest, Gates was in a position to invest staff to live and breathe this project and continue to do so. The social venture partners model is really to engage individual donors in that space. And we can't guarantee that an individual volunteer is going to show up with the same wherewithal as a full-time tenured program officer. And so how we balance that and equip an individual has really been around encouraging understanding of the community, understanding of listening skills and adaptive learning, and thinking about just because they come with some knowledge of one sector, not to overly apply that to a sector that they're not super knowledgeable about.
Perfect. I think it's a nice kind of question perhaps for you all to consider at your tables when we go back to table discussions, which is there a way that you've changed showing up? And to share that with each other, because that's kind of concrete prompts for how we can be different. All right, Michael, we're going to get a fuller introduction from you, and you are going to share with us the answer to, I think, one of the $25,000 questions, which is, do you still believe in collective impact?
Yes, what is my answer to that? So my name is, once again, Michael Brown with the Seattle Foundation. I'm the Vice President of Programs, and the Seattle Foundation is a community foundation for the greater Seattle region. And we, along with our colleagues at the Gates Foundation, in many ways incubated the Roadmap Project. And when we did that in the early days, it was right when the collective impact concept came out. I will admit, I had some trepidation about it because I was trying to figure out, okay, well, how is this different from just funder collaboration, and how do we avoid that top-down approach, and can we really engage communities, systems, et cetera, toward this very audacious goal? And maybe just to level set for those of you who aren't from Seattle, it's a very prosperous region. But as a region, we've been very effective at importing talent, if not done a great job of growing our own. And my colleague to the left has a great saying that we have been program rich, but system poor. So what we were trying to do through the Roadmap effort, we're rolling the die. And I definitely had some concerns early on as to whether or not this thing was going to work. I'm not saying that there haven't been challenges along the way, but I have become a big believer in collective impact. So much so that everything that the Seattle Foundation does is within the realm of collective impact. So we have a collective impact effort around addressing health, housing, and economic inequity in pretty much the Roadmap region called Communities of Opportunity. We have a collective impact effort that we have just initiated with the public sector and the private sector around middle-income jobs. We have a collective impact effort we've been trying to build with some of our colleagues around environmental equity. And the reason for us why collective impact is such an important frame is the issues. I mean, I feel like I'm just repeating everything that was in the article 5 years ago, but the issues continue to get more complex. And there is no way that any of us can solve any of these issues on our own. And if we aren't working collaboratively with each other and coming up with a common frame, I really am repeating the article from 5 years ago. I really don't believe that we're going to get to the type of impact that we want, sustained impact. I think we would have nice things that we do if we're just collaborating, but to give something up in order to get something bigger, I mean, that for us is the really important piece. And I think for the foundation, we have learned a lot working with not just our philanthropic colleagues, but with community, with other system actors, which has helped us think about how we do collective impact, and in particular the role of the community foundation, how we utilize that role, that power in a different way. Sometimes we are going to be very proactive and take a leadership role, and other times we're going to be very passive, but still playing a very engaged role. And as we think about the intersection of all of these various systems, that all of our work now is moving us more upstream. So we think about system transformation, we think about policy change, we think about more upstream approaches. We've changed our grant making. We're not doing 400 or 500 grants anymore. If we do 100 grants over the course of the year, that's a really good year. We look at ways that we can build capacity on the ground and support community-based organizations at the same time, also supporting the intermediaries and larger scale organizations. We look at ways of trying to influence our public sector and philanthropic colleagues as well, to engage them around the table. How do we amplify community voice? How do we incorporate equity, in particular racial equity, more into these efforts? I mean, it's not easy. If I really think about the amount of time that I or my team spend on this, I mean, it's 90%, if not more, but it's the important thing to do. One of the things that we were talking about before we came into the room is what's the difference between funder collaboration and collective impact. And those of you who are funders, I think not that collaboration is easy, because we all have our things that we're trying to accomplish, and working with another funder is not always easy. But the thing that's different for me is when I think about collaboration, we can kind of, walk side by side and, kind of get to something that's pretty cool. But collective impact is really kind of intertwining your work. And there are things that our colleagues at Gates can do that we can't do. There are things that our colleagues at the county can do that we can't do. There are things that the public sector can do that we can't do. But when we intertwine all of those things, that's when we leverage our collective work. And I think that's where things really happen. Once again, not naive enough to say that it's an easy thing. It takes a lot of work, but I don't know how we turn back now.
I think that's a lot out there. I'd love to hear just one thing you each responded to in what Michael was saying.
I guess I would say first, you hear from Michael how committed the Seattle Foundation is to this and how embedded the concept is into the work of the foundation. And I think for the rest of us, after 5 years, it is a question of, are we ready for the next thing, or are we going to double down? And for social venture partners, we're equally sitting with, we know we can't do this work alone, and thus how do we work consistently with our community partners and philanthropic partners to make sure that we're working towards something that's bigger?
And to answer the original question, I would say yes, but I'm a realist now. So do I still believe in collective impact? Yes, but 5 or 6 years into it, it's good. You have to be in it for the long haul, in my opinion. It would be very tough to be, if you're a funder who knows they're going to change over their ideas about doing work in 2 or 3 years. I would say this might not be the best the best bet for you over that time. Just to kind of fill in a little more of the details about how funders have changed practice. So one thing we did at the Gates Foundation, and I'm a member of our local giving program, so the funds I'm working with are primarily funds we focused on Washington State since the inception of the foundation. One way we approached joining our funding to a collective impact effort was to look at all the funding we did across the entire county and followed the footprint of where the greatest need was, which was into the region of the county identified in the roadmap projects. So we took dollars that had been going somewhat more broadly across the whole county and focused it in a more specific place. We backed the strategies of the roadmap. We also shifted some of how we were doing money. So we were doing a fair number of capital projects, and we decided there was much more immediate need and we needed to focus. So about half of our funding in the county had been going to capital projects. We took that and we focused it on more immediate programmatic needs related to the roadmap project. So that's just another way that we as a funder shifted. There's stories of many other funders in the roadmap project, College Spark Washington, United Way of King County, that have taken, looked at their funding and decided and looked at ways they could specifically helping to meet some of the indicators or some of the strategies built out by work groups of the roadmap project as well.
And one of the strategy we would employ in our kind of quarterly meetings of the aligned funders was to have people like College Spark spend 20 minutes kind of just unpacking how they shifted their culture internally to do more aligned funding or to even get permission to do that. And sometimes those living and breathing examples are just really great ways for people to go, I couldn't do that, but I could do something like that. Really pushes it forward. All right, we're going to your chewy question, Ken, which I think is really another great chewy question, which is, what keeps you up at night about a funder's role in collective impact?
Yeah. So, someone stole my answer, which is, what is alignment? So hopefully maybe I'll start to unpack that. And also a little bit the how do you manage all those egos part is part of my answer as well. So, I mean, here's the scenario. One way to think about what is collaboration, really, in a way, right? And so one way to think about this is there's just a bunch of different levels of intensity you could get to in terms of funders collaborating with each other, right? And maybe the ground floor is you talk to each other and just understand what the other people doing work in the same geography or with the same population are doing. And maybe a next level is something you might call alignment in a way. So once you understand and just have a knowledge of what everyone is doing, maybe you could make some choices like, oh, they're doing that, so we'll do that. Or, oh, they're doing that, and so we'll join with them on this thing that's similar. Maybe a next layer up, tier 3, is a deeper level of actual coordination of effort on a strategic level. Wow, looking ahead, we see you're going there, I'm gonna do this thing. We see you're going there and going to do this thing. We have funders getting towards that in a space within the roadmap project around opportunity youth. We have funders very consciously thinking of, oh, my role is the quality of program development here. My role is creating an intake and start system, and there's pieces starting to come together in that particular subdomain, if you will, of the roadmap project. But then maybe at the very top is actual integration, where our funding, each funder's funding is interdependent on the funding of the others in order for us all to be successful. So the good question is, which one of those is right? For any group of funders or any particular collective impact project, and only that will differ across everyone's project. But I will call out there what I think is what starts to keep me up at night about this is that one of the base elements of collective impact is that you need mutually reinforcing activities. And actually the credit for program rich but system poor goes to, if Jeff Edmonds is here, he would kill me if I didn't give him and the folks from Cincinnati, and actually I believe the Cincinnati coroner, credit for coming up with that as one of his reasons why in their community he was seeing too many young men appear on the tables of the coroner's office. And something that resonated with the funders and really actually helped us to get together at the start was we had been funding so many different projects that didn't come together, we felt, in a big sense for our whole population in our region. So if one of the fundamental concepts of collective impact is activities need to be mutually reinforcing, what is the role of funders in breaking down those silos so that things can get to mutually reinforcing? So if we as funders, and you can throw public and private funders in this, but really the private funders are the ones with the most flexibility, far more flexibility than most public sources. If we can't start to align our funding, are we part of the solution or are we part of the problem? Is our way of doing funding that keeps all of our separate funding sources separate from each, vaguely in the same space, and maybe aligned to the project, but not actually in some way interdependent or coordinated with each other? Are we actually maybe a bigger part of the problem than the solution in this work? And ultimately, this is an issue of funder accountability, right? Who are we accountable to? Well, the reality is not much of anyone. We're up separately, mainly accountable to our own institutions and trustees, maybe community boards in some case. We do that. I think the story we tell ourselves is independence is incredibly valuable. I think what actually underlies that is power and control.
I thought that pause was deserving of at least some applause. Sally and Michael, I'll let you go first.
You're getting a lot of
I
sleep,
know,
Ken.
I know, exactly. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to say. I share a lot of Ken's thoughts. I mean, one of the things we were talking about before we walked in, and once again, those of us who work for funders, we understand this dynamic, that a short-term approach, and not putting all of this on boards. I mean, I want to be clear about that, but there is that component as well of short-term focus, output, and not thinking about the long-term gain, which then means that program directors, program officers, et cetera, view the world in a very short-term lens, think about outputs, and we aren't able to do some of that work. And then I get to a point of, well, even if we all functioned, long-term patient view, and we're in this all for the long haul, I think there's still this element that would keep us from doing the type of alignment that Ken referenced. And part of this, I think, is based on relationships. I mean, the three of us have known each other for years. There's open, very transparent communication. We work very well with each other. And I think we also understand the confines that we operate in within our own institutions, and are able to then figure out how we can, you can do this, I can do this, you can do this. But that, once again, that's not prevalent necessarily, and I don't know what the answer is.
So in the spirit of learning from failure, I would say one of the things all of us have invested in, and we should say on one of the calls, there was a question of how transparent we were going to be, and we all committed to it. And so we are all investing in this Rapid Resource Pooled Fund, which is an opportunity through the Aligned Funders Group to make rapid investments in the roadmap system. And there is both a benefit to the funder side. Some of us are not able to make these kind of short investments And there is a benefit to the community side where these work groups don't have their immediate needs. It is leadership development. It is a significant kind of $20,000 effort. And from the funding position, we wanted this to be connected to systems change. We wanted $20,000 grants connected to systems change. And we have had conversations when looking at the proposals around, are we looking at an effort that is really a long-term systems change outcome, or are we looking at an output that may develop over time when we're not involved in it, that's going to lead to systems change? And I think we have to grapple with, we are invested in this longer-term effort, but we are limited in our ability to move up the ladder that Ken just talked about to more integrated funding that enables those solutions to thrive.
Whoa. That was exciting, wasn't it? I can feel that you all desperately want to turn to each other and share some of the things you've been thinking in response to the prompts from the panel. So we're going to have 10 minutes at your table. If you're alone at a table, I invite you to move and join someone else, unless you enjoy talking with yourself, which I think is entirely possible. So this is these instructions are super simple. Ready? I would suggest that we all go around the table once and everyone say one thing that is alive for them from this presentation. One thing that is chewy. One thing that actually penetrated in the afternoon gloom. Go. 10 minutes. Okay. What I'd love, we have 15 minutes between you and the beautiful blue skies of Seattle. Do not think that it is ever like this in June. This is an aberration. This is the kind of weather that drives up our already inflamed real estate market. Don't love it here too much. All right, who's got a hand? Who wants to share something they thought of, something they heard at their table that was cool, a question for the panel? I'm just giving anything. Come on, come on, come on. You're the best, you're the best. These two.
Oh, okay. Sorry. We were just talking.
Would you stand up and introduce yourself?
Certainly. Sorry, I'm Sheila Cavallo with the Oklahoma City County Health Department.
Great.
And our main issue for our collective impact efforts in Oklahoma City is teen pregnancy prevention, because we're currently #2 in the nation, and not in a good way. So we're working on that. We're gonna beat it. But part of what we were talking about at our table is how much of this success relies on the relationships between the people involved. Is it tied to how connected we are to one another in our collaborative? Because Darius was saying in our collaborative we have a lot of trust among all of our partners and our different the different people who are at the table. And then also as we go to scale and we grow, how do we not lose that sense of community among ourselves? And it just occurred to me that really we're in the business of building community at all levels. At every level that we work at, we are building community. And that just seems like a key piece to me for making this work, you know, knitting ourselves together at all levels, or maybe knitting ourselves back together at all levels.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Andrea Plevik. I'm from Washtenaw County, Michigan. I'm here with my colleagues from the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation and the United Way of Washtenaw County. I'm from Washtenaw County government. And we had a really great conversation about whether or not we can actually move from program-rich, system-poor environments through what is principally a private sector-led response to a public sector systemic failure, and to what extent can we impact through collective impact or any other sort of alignment that power and control dynamic, and so we're still grappling with that through our Washtenaw coordinated funding efforts, and we'd love to hear more thoughts on that.
Perfect. Couple more flavors from tables, thank you.
Oh, okay.
She just itched her nose. That was not a hand raise. I will need at least 2 more and then we can move on to questions, but I'd just love to hear just a flavor of what other people are talking about. Thank you.
Stephanie Sylvester with the Children's Trust from Miami. So I guess my thing here is just I'm a little amazed or concerned, taken back about the concern about being able to collaborate at the funder. It seems to me, and I will just put out there that I've only been doing this work for 2.5 years. Before that was in corporate America, but it seems to me like this is just what we should all be doing. It seems easy. So I'm kind of scratching my head why this is difficult. Clearly, it must be an important topic because we're having an entire conference around it.
Come on, you guys, give it up. All right, I think that's a good. Don't you think that's a good prompt for my pitch? Don't you think we should put them on the spot a little bit? What do you make of what she said, Michael?
Well, I mean, I'm going to connect a couple of points. I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, and it's amazing when you think about it, because what we funders, we have been hypocrites. We tell our nonprofit organizations collaborate, yet we can't do it. But I also think it does come to relationships. You know, I trust these two, you know, as much as I trust my own team. And we can have conversations with each other. We can be brutally frank with each other. And because of that, there's a trust, and we can then figure out how do we leverage and how do we do. Yeah, that dynamic does shift when you bring more people around the table, but there is something in that funder water that keeps, there's a protectiveness. Like there's something I need to hold so I can go back to my board or I can go back to my CEO so we can sell to our base versus we have a righteous duty to address challenges in our community, and who cares who gets credit as long as we eliminate the damn problem.
Well, it's more bracing than a shot of schnapps. Ken, thoughts?
Sure. Are these my final thoughts?
No,
or? All
he's
right.
done this time. Let's get him off the stage.
I'm working on it in my head. Actually, I think my final thoughts will be kind of along these lines. So I'll pitch
Perfect.
it to
Sally,
someone.
any comment?
Yeah, we can do final thoughts.
All right, let's do final thoughts.
We're doing final thoughts? We're not doing questions?
All right, we can have a couple questions.
Yeah.
You guys were
These are
doing
great.
good talking at the tables. One or two questions. Oh, yeah.
Hi, I just rethought maybe I still do want to ask my question. My name is Andrea Dearlove, and I'm with the Wisconsin Partnership Program, and it was related to the question that was asked over there, and then you made me think of it again. How much of the alignment that you have been able to accomplish, the impetus was from program staff working together versus the impetus from the board or a CEO saying this is something we must do, and then depending on which direction it came from, how did it get to this point?
Do you have a hunch what they're going to answer?
Yes.
Sally?
You guys start with the beginning of roadmap. I mean, you might as well start from what it took for you two originally.
The way things played out in this particular project, 90% would be my answer to your question. 90% program staff.
I think one of the discussions we had up here was, how do you involve boards or the people that you're organizationally accountable to in the kind of longer term time horizons of collective impact, in the different ways of working, in the different ways that institutions have to respond in order to play effectively and negotiate those role balances?
Yeah, I would say for the board piece, and I look to these two because frankly, when Social Venture Partners was ready to dig into the roadmap project and collective impact, I was fortunate to call on my colleagues versus have our board call on their colleagues. And part of that was to think through what's the best way to suss out, is this a viable way of doing business for our organization? And it was useful to understand the hiccups and challenges that they had faced, as well as to kind of right-size expectations about the time horizon. For the board portion, I mean, we need to acknowledge that most board members are not just on one board, they're on more than one board, and thus engaging a board member and helping them understand the value of collective impact is not just a one-time win, it's a win for the community. And especially in a community that is integrated and working on more than one collective impact model. When we think about how can a board understand this, we're also asking a board member to realize that the nonprofit that they are advocating for, that they're investing in, is not able to do their work alone. And that is a shift for some board members. And helping and enabling board members to see their value in being a bridge builder, not just an investor, is another shift for board members. We're then also trying to ask a nonprofit and putting them in a position where they have to be brutally honest about the mission that they're working to achieve is not the bright, shiny silver bullet. It is one of many. And engaging and working with a nonprofit to be able to say that, then to be able to say it to their board, that's not just a lunchtime conversation. And so how we all work together to help board members is, I think, a challenge we're all grappling with.
Wonderful. One or two more questions?
Hi, I'm Ajamu Kitwana with the ESL Charitable Foundation in Rochester, New York. I'm also green to funding collective impact, and I have a kind of why is this a problem question as well. Ken said towards the end, talked about accountability. At the end of the day, as funders, we're accountable to ourselves and our boards, and generally we can invest in whatever we want. In theory, within the context of collective impact, there's a common agenda. There's some parameters under which we want to fund in order to, again, support aligned activities. But I do wonder, so on one hand, why is it a problem then, with accountability? But it would seem you'd have to figure out how to hold yourself accountable in your funding decisions. So there's that common agenda out there, but how do you, as a funder, kind of check the decisions to ensure that what you're funding is supporting that common agenda and not just kind of your take on it or the parts of it that you like, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Wow.
Yeah, bingo. I don't, I'm not sure I have an answer other to say this is, part of what we're continuing to figure out and I think through in terms of these projects. I always think that the power of collective impact does lie in this kind of soft accountability, if you want an allusion to soft power versus hard power. There's sort of a peer group pressure in a way that is the secret sauce, I believe, of collective impact efforts and what we're trying to bring to other attempts to solve very, issues in the community that have been intractable for decades. And that is really, in my interpretation of collective impact, what holds it there. And funders turn out to be a really uniquely interesting partner in that dynamic, just because they have such tremendous independence from everyone else. Unlike others, which really someone is holding some string somewhere, funders have fewer strings. And so I think what I was trying to bring out through my somewhat provocative attempt to make my comments was we need to be looking pretty deeply at ourselves and our roles in these projects and just always understanding how we can do better, right? Because we are the folks who need to hold ourselves accountable. And I think, sorry, I'm kind of giving my closing remarks anyway,
we've got 5 minutes,
whether
so
you wanted me to or not, I guess.
Let's go into it.
I just want to reiterate, I wasn't saying the Gates Foundation or me as an individual program officer was some shining example of exactly the best way to do things, not by no means, no. And many of the partners in the project, in the roadmap project, have been finding those ways to work together. It's certainly been surprising to me that it has taken, kind of as long as it has, for us to put together some of this deeper, more integrated work. And I will just reiterate that for that it would be easier to get 7 school districts to work together than it is to get 7 private funders to work together, tells you that there is an issue in our sector that we need to work hard on to be as good at as we can be. Obviously, everyone has different issues and reasons why collaboration is hard as a funding entity, but I would just always push us to say, what's the next step? Is there a way we can go deeper and do better for the ultimate impact on the communities or kids or whoever we're trying to serve?
Perfect. Michael?
Well, maybe just picking up on that last part. And one of the things that, going back to my Chewy question of do I still believe in collective impact? We're still in the early stages. I mean, we're 5 years, 6 years in, and the real question that's in front of us are we learning, and what are we doing with the things that we have learned? And as I said earlier, many of the collective impact efforts that we have seeded post-roadmap, we have learned a lot of lessons and have been applying those lessons. I'm just going to use one really quick example. So there's a partnership of funders working around equitable development and equitable community development, and this intersection of economic opportunity, environment, and equity. And for the Seattle Foundation, our primary focus was economic opportunity, and much to the chagrin of my colleagues, I would always walk in and say, I don't really care about the environment, I care about equity and economic opportunity. But what's kept us together over a four-year period is that while economic opportunity is our primary focus, and for another colleague, environment is, and for another colleague, it's in equity, we have all bought into the same thing, that we are working at the intersection of the 3 E's. So now when I go back to the Seattle Foundation, I'm carrying forth what the Bullitt Foundation's priorities are around environment. And that's where, I feel like there are things that we have learned along the way, which gives me hope that as we do more collective impact efforts, that integration, intertwining will occur, and we will get to a much greater effect in terms of the work that we're doing together.
Bring us home, Sally.
Well, I'm the funder that cares about the environment and that other collaborative. So glad you could say that transit thing to another group. Just echoing some of the comments about how important are relationships. I think we're talking about how important is trust. And we are talking about not just trust between funders, and while we sometimes don't trust each other, we're also talking about how much are we willing to trust the community to set, both name the challenge in the community and help design that solution. And that is something that philanthropy hasn't always done well, and we are grappling with that in this model. I think a lot about capacity and how Social Venture Partners has the capacity to have staff that is working to spend half of their time inside the organization and half their time outside. I am equally accountable to Social Venture Partners as I am to the goals of these collective impact efforts that we're in. And that is a different model than our nonprofits are able to be in. And so how can we as funders help enable nonprofits to shift their focus from accountability just for their mission to accountability of the larger project has been a thing that I'm noodling on, continues to keep me up at night, and I'm sure will keep me up tonight.
Beautiful. Please join me in a round of applause.